Hello, my friend, and welcome to your sleep story. My name is Alex Thompson, and it's a true pleasure to guide you into a restful and restorative sleep tonight. In this evening's tale, we journey to the heart of a mystical forest, a place where ancient secrets are whispered through the trees, and the air hums with quiet enchantment. But as serene as it may seem, the forest holds mysteries waiting to unfold, paths that twist into the unknown. Before we step into this magical world, let's take a moment to release the weight of the day. Find your most comfortable position, close your eyes, and take a slow, calming breath. Feel yourself sinking into stillness, leaving behind all distractions as we prepare to wander through the wonders of the forest. Let's begin. The kingdom of Lysana had not seen the sun in 50 years. The sky hung heavy with an eternal twilight, a murky blend of deep purples and pale oranges that never shifted into dawn or faded into night. Crops withered in the dim light, leaving the people desperate and restless, clinging to faint whispers of hope that some long-lost savior would end their suffering. Amara trudged through the muddy streets of Grey Hollow, a village on the edge of the kingdom, where desperation clung to the air like a mist. Once a scholar of the royal court, she now lived in exile, her name forgotten by those who had once praised her brilliance. She'd spent the last decade scouring ruins and archives, trying to understand the kingdom's slow decay and the curse that bound it. What she had found, however, were fragments, whispers of a betrayal buried deep in history. That evening, as the wind howled through the skeletal trees of the forest, Amara found herself drawn to the ruins of her childhood home. It stood on the outskirts of the village, an empty shell consumed by ivy and rot. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of damp stone, and yet something about it called to her. In what used to be her father's study, she stumbled upon a hidden compartment beneath the broken floorboards. Her fingers brushed against cold metal, and she pulled out a lantern, unlike any she had ever seen. It was ornate but worn, its surface etched with strange flowing patterns that seemed to ripple faintly in the dim light. The glass panels shimmered, not with the reflection of the twilight, but with their own faint glow, shifting colors that danced like distant stars. And then, the whispers began. Amara. She froze, the lantern clutched tightly in her hands. The voice was faint, like a breeze slipping through cracks in stone, but it spoke her name with clarity. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The lantern flickered, and the voice grew louder. "You seek answers. I carry them, but only the worthy can bear the truth." Amara felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had spent years searching for something, anything, that could explain the kingdom's plight, but she had not expected this. "What are you?" "I am the Lantern of Echoes," the voice replied, "a fragment of what was lost. Take me, and I will show you the path, but tread carefully, for the echoes of the past are not without pain." Before Amara could respond, the lantern's glow dimmed, and silence fell once more. She stared at it, her heart pounding. The scholar in her screamed for caution, but the woman who had watched her kingdom rot for 50 years couldn't resist the chance to uncover the truth. She stood, holding the lantern close. "If you can show me the way, I'll follow. But I'm not afraid of pain." The lantern hummed faintly, as though it understood. Amara stepped out of the ruins, lantern in hand, her shadow stretching long against the twilight. The journey had begun. The whispering lantern grew heavier in Amara's hand, the farther she walked. It wasn't a physical weight, at least not one she could measure, but something about the object felt alive, pulsing with an unseen force. As she left Grey Hollow behind and entered the edge of the forest of forgetting, the lantern's glow grew brighter, illuminating the twisted trees and thorny underbrush. The forest of forgetting was not a place to be traversed lightly. Stories spoke of travelers losing themselves not just in direction, but in identity. Names, faces, and memories stolen away the longer they stayed. Yet the lantern's glow cut through the forest's oppressive atmosphere, guiding Amara along a winding path that seemed to appear and disappear with each step. "Why does this place feel wrong?" she muttered to herself, though she half hoped the lantern would answer. To her surprise, it did. "This forest feeds on despair," the voice said softly, the lantern's light flickering as it spoke. It was born of grief, much like the curse that binds this kingdom. Those who linger too long lose what they hold most dear. The words sent a chill through her. She gripped the lantern tighter and quickened her pace, determined to avoid the fate of those who had disappeared here before her. She wasn't alone for long. The thief appeared as if from the shadows themselves. One moment the path was empty, the next, a wiry man with dark, matted hair stepped in front of her, a dagger glinting in his hand. His clothes were ragged but practical, and his piercing eyes darted from her to the lantern with sharp precision. "That's quite the prize you've got there," he said, his voice rough but calm. He gestured to the lantern with his blade. "Hand it over, and maybe I'll let you walk out of here." Amara narrowed her eyes. "You have no idea what you're asking for. This isn't some trinket to sell at a market." The thief smirked, taking a step closer. "I'll be the judge of that. Besides, you don't look like much of a fighter. Save yourself the trouble." Before Amara could respond, the lantern flared, its light flooding the path with an almost blinding brilliance. The thief staggered back, shielding his eyes. When the light dimmed, the dagger in his hand had fallen to the ground, and the man looked visibly shaken. What was that?" he stammered. "You wanted it," the lantern's voice intoned, its tone deeper and more resonant than before. "Now you are bound to it." Amara watched in shock as the man's expression shifted from fear to anger. "What did you do to me?" he growled, stepping toward her. Though there was now a hesitance in his movements, the lantern pulsed again. "You sought to claim me, and now your fate is tied to mine. You cannot part from me until the curse is undone. Serve her, or perish." The thief's face paled. "Serve her?" He turned to Amara, his hands clenching into fists. "I didn't sign up for this." Amara stared at him, then at the lantern. "What does it mean by that?" she asked, though she had a sinking suspicion she already knew. The thief sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. "It means I don't have a choice, do I? I'm stuck with you." He glared at her. "Name's Kyle, by the way. Don't think this makes us friends." Amara couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. "Good. I wasn't looking for one." As they continued through the forest, Kyle walked a few paces behind her, muttering under his breath. Amara ignored him, focusing instead on the lantern's faint whispers, which now seemed to guide her steps. "What's the plan then?" Kyle asked after a long silence. "The lantern says I need to find 3 echoes," Amara replied, glancing at him over her shoulder. "They're fragments of the truth, pieces of what really happened to the kingdom. If I can gather them, the curse can be undone. Kyle snorted. Sounds simple enough, except for the part where the kingdom's crawling with danger, and you've got no idea where these echoes are. Amara shot him a withering look. If you're going to complain the entire time, you might as well make yourself useful instead. Kyle held up his hands defensively. Relax, just pointing out the obvious. I'll stick around. You've got my soul or whatever, but don't expect me to start singing songs about bravery. Amara shook her head and turned back to the path. Despite her annoyance, she felt a small sense of relief. Kyle might have been a thief, but he knew how to navigate danger, and something told her they were going to face plenty of it. By the time they reached the heart of the forest, the lantern's glow had grown steady and strong, casting long shadows against the gnarled trees. A soft hum filled the air, and Amara felt an almost magnetic pull drawing her toward a clearing ahead. "This must be it," she murmured, stepping forward. Kyle grabbed her arm, stopping her. "Wait, look." In the clearing stood a massive tree, its roots twisting through the ground like the veins of a giant. Hanging from its branches were dozens of mirrors, their surfaces cracked and clouded. Amara felt an eerie stillness settle over the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "The first echo lies within," the lantern whispered. "But beware, the truth is never easy to face." Amara stepped forward, her heart pounding. The first piece of the puzzle awaited her, but she could already sense that uncovering it would cost her more than she was ready to give. The clearing was silent, save for the faint hum of the lantern. Amara approached the massive tree cautiously, her eyes flicking between the mirrors that hung from its branches like strange, broken fruit. They reflected not her current image, but distorted fragments of herself. A young girl clutching a book, a court scholar in her ceremonial robes, a weary exile in a threadbare cloak. Kyle lingered at the edge of the clearing, his arms crossed. "You sure this is a good idea? Those things look like they bite." "They're mirrors," Amara said, though her voice wavered. "What harm can they do?" Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Plenty. If the stories about this forest are true, don't say I didn't warn you." Amara ignored him and stepped closer to the tree. As she did, one of the mirrors shimmered, its cracks fading away until its surface became smooth and clear. She caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection, her current self, tired and worn. But then the image changed. In the mirror, she saw a grand hall bathed in golden light. It was the royal court, as she remembered it from her youth. She saw herself standing before the king, her head bowed as she presented a scroll of ancient texts. The memory was vivid, but something about it felt wrong. The colors were too sharp, the details too precise, as if the mirror wasn't just showing her the past, but amplifying it. "Do you see it?" the lantern whispered. Amara nodded, her voice barely audible. "It's my memory. The day I first warned the king about the curse." The lantern's glow dimmed slightly. "Not just a memory, an echo of truth. Step closer and claim it." Amara hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached toward the mirror. The moment her fingertips brushed its surface, the world around her shifted. She was no longer in the clearing. She stood in the grand hall, just as the mirror had shown. The air smelled of incense and polished wood, and sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting vibrant patterns across the floor. "Amara, speak," the king's voice commanded. Amara turned to see King Edric seated on his gilded throne, his face stern but not unkind. Beside him stood the Queen Regent, her sharp features unreadable. The court's advisors flanked them, their expressions a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "This cannot be real," Amara whispered, but no one seemed to hear her. The younger version of herself stepped forward, holding the scroll tightly. "Your Majesty, the texts are clear. The Starborn once protected this kingdom, but their exile left a wound in the land. The curse, this twilight, it's their revenge. If we do not act, the kingdom will wither entirely." The king's brow furrowed. "What do you suggest, scholar? That we beg their forgiveness? Offer them our lands in penance?" Amara watched the scene unfold, her chest tightening. She remembered this moment vividly. She had pleaded with the court to seek out the Starborn and make amends, but her words had fallen on deaf ears. As the memory played out, the Queen Regent stepped forward, her voice like silk. "Your Majesty, this is mere superstition. The Starborn are long gone. The scholar's warnings are nothing but the ramblings of a frightened mind." The younger Amara faltered, her face falling. I only wish to save the kingdom." "And yet," the Queen Regent said, her lips curling into a faint smile, "you sow fear instead. Let us not waste the court's time on ghost stories." Amara felt the sting of those words anew, as if the memory had come alive within her. She wanted to shout at her younger self, to tell her to fight harder, but the scene was already unraveling. The court dissolved into shadow, and the mirror appeared before her again, now glowing faintly. A voice echoed from its depths, low and mournful. "Truth unspoken, a chance lost. The first echo is yours, if you will bear its weight." Amara opened her eyes to find herself back in the clearing, the lantern clutched tightly in her hands. Kael was standing over her, his expression a mix of concern and irritation. "You've been standing there like a statue for 5 minutes," he said. "What happened?" "I saw the court," Amara replied, her voice shaky. "I remembered the day I warned them about the curse. They didn't listen, and I didn't push hard enough." Kael frowned. "Sounds like a lot of guilt for something that wasn't really your fault." Amara shook her head. "I should have tried harder. Maybe if I had." She trailed off, the weight of the echo settling over her like a shroud. The lantern pulsed gently, drawing her attention. "The first echo is within you now. 2 remain. But beware, the further you go, the heavier the burden will grow." Amara looked at Kael, who shrugged. "Well, if this is what we're in for, I hope you've got a strong back." She let out a soft laugh despite herself. "You'll have to carry your share too." As they left the clearing, the mirrors hanging from the tree began to fade, their light dimming until they were nothing but ordinary shards of glass. The forest seemed darker now, the path ahead more foreboding. Amara tightened her grip on the lantern. 1 echo down, 2 to go, and with each step, the truth felt more dangerous than she could have imagined. Amara and Kael trudged deeper into the forest of forgetting, the trees growing denser, and the air colder with every step. The lantern's glow seemed to dim slightly, as though conserving its energy for what lay ahead. Amara felt the weight of the first echo in her chest, like an invisible thread tying her to the truth she had uncovered. Kael walked a few paces behind her, unusually quiet. Every so often, he would glance over his shoulder, his hand hovering near the hilt of a dagger tucked into his belt. "You're awfully jumpy," Amara remarked, not looking back. "Can you blame me?" Kael muttered. "We just walked out of a cursed forest full of mind-stealing mirrors. Forgive me if I'm not relaxed." She sighed, but didn't respond. The silence between them stretched until the lantern pulsed again, its light flickering like a heartbeat. "The second echo lies beyond the forest," the lantern whispered, "in the ruins of the Starborn Temple, a place of reverence and sorrow." Kyle frowned. "The Starborn Temple? That's halfway across the lowlands. We're talking miles of open ground crawling with raiders and shadow beasts." Amara tightened her grip on the lantern. "We don't have a choice. If the echo is there, we'll go." After days of travel, they emerged from the forest into the lowlands. The plains stretched wide and barren, dotted with jagged rocks and patches of dead grass. The sunless twilight cast long shadows across the landscape, and a cold wind howled through the open air. In the distance, the Starborn Temple rose like a jagged scar against the horizon. Its once grand spires were now crumbling, the black stone flecked with ash and decay. "Cheery place," Kael muttered as they approached. As they drew closer, Amara noticed carvings etched into the walls of the temple. They depicted celestial figures with glowing eyes and flowing hair, their arms outstretched as if cradling the stars. Despite the temple's ruin, the carvings still radiated an eerie beauty. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of burned wood. The great hall was littered with broken pillars and shattered mosaics. At the center of the room stood a stone altar, its surface cracked but intact. Above it, a massive circular window let in the faint light of the twilight sky. "This place gives me the creeps," Kael said, his voice low. Amara ignored him, stepping closer to the altar. The lantern's glow grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. "The second echo lies here," the lantern whispered. "But to claim it, a price must be paid." Amara froze. "What kind of price?" The lantern did not answer. Instead, the air around her grew heavy, and the shadows seemed to move. Without warning, the room shifted. The broken walls repaired themselves, the shattered mosaics reassembled, and the altar gleamed as if newly polished. Amara found herself standing in the temple as it must have been in its prime. The chamber was filled with starborn figures, their silver hair glowing faintly, their expressions solemn. At the center of them stood a single figure, a tall man with piercing, otherworldly eyes. He wore robes adorned with shimmering stars, and in his hands he held a small orb of light. "This is a memory," Amara whispered, realizing the scene was playing out before her, like the first echo. The man's voice echoed through the hall, powerful and mournful. "The mortals have turned their backs on us. They have forgotten the oaths they swore, the balance they promised to uphold. The twilight is their punishment and their lesson." The other starborn murmured in agreement, but one among them stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Not all mortals have forgotten. Some still honor us, still seek to restore the balance. Should they all suffer for the sins of the few?" The man's expression hardened. "The balance demands sacrifice. Without it, there can be no harmony." Amara watched as the woman stepped closer to the man, her voice soft but firm. "Then let the sacrifice be mine. Let my light preserve the hope of those who remain loyal. Give them a chance to make amends." The man hesitated, his gaze locked on the woman. After a long pause, he nodded. Very well. Your light will seal this temple, preserving the memory of what was lost. Should a mortal prove worthy, they will find the truth here. The woman stepped onto the altar, her form glowing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. Amara shielded her eyes, and when she looked again, the temple had returned to its ruined state. The lantern's voice broke the silence. The second echo is the echo of sacrifice. To claim it, you must carry the memory of her light and the burden of her choice. Amara stepped forward, her heart heavy. She placed her hand on the altar, and the lantern's glow enveloped her. A rush of emotions flooded her senses: sorrow, hope, and a deep, aching loss. When the light faded, she found herself back in the ruined hall, her legs trembling. Kael rushed to her side, steadying her. "What happened this time?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "She gave herself," Amara said quietly. "One of the Starborn. She sacrificed her light to give the kingdom a chance to make things right. But we failed her." Kael frowned. "Sounds like this kingdom's got a habit of wasting second chances." Amara didn't respond. She stared at the altar, the weight of the second echo pressing down on her. 2 echoes down, 1 to go, and she knew the final truth would be the hardest to face. The journey to the final echo was unlike anything Amara and Kael had experienced before. The land around them seemed to grow darker, the twilight deepening into something suffocating and oppressive. The air was thick, and each step felt heavier than the last. Even Kael, who had managed to keep his sharp wit intact through most of their journey, was quiet now. "The final echo lies in the Vale of Ash," the lantern whispered, its light flickering weakly. "It is the heart of the curse, the place where truth and sorrow intertwine. Few have dared to approach it, and fewer still have returned." Amara looked ahead, her resolve firm despite the weight of the 2 echoes she already carried. "Then we'll be the ones to return." Kael snorted softly, though there was no humor in it. "Optimistic, aren't we? You're braver than I am, that's for sure. Or more foolish," she muttered, though a faint smile tugged at her lips. The Vale of Ash lay at the edge of the kingdom, where the earth had cracked open long ago, spewing fire and smoke into the sky. What remained was a vast wasteland, the ground coated in layers of ash that swirled with every gust of wind. Charred trees jutted out of the ground like skeletal fingers, and the air smelled of sulfur and decay. At the center of the wasteland stood a towering spire of black stone, its surface carved with runes that glowed faintly in the gloom. This was the Vale, the very heart of the curse. "Doesn't look welcoming," Kael said, his voice tight as they approached the spire. "It isn't supposed to be," Amara replied, gripping the lantern tightly. The lantern pulsed weakly, its voice barely audible. "The final echo lies within. But beware, the truth will demand everything." Amara exchanged a glance with Kael, who gave her a small nod. "Guess we're doing this," he said, though his hand rested uneasily on the hilt of his dagger. Together, they stepped into the spire. The interior was eerily quiet, the walls lined with more of the glowing runes. As they descended deeper, the air grew colder, and a faint hum filled their ears. At the bottom of the spire was a vast chamber, its floor covered in a swirling mist of ash. In the center of the room stood a figure. It was neither man nor starborn, but something in between, a creature of shadow and light, its form constantly shifting. Its eyes glowed like twin stars, piercing and unrelenting. "Who dares disturb the veil?" the figure intoned, its voice echoing in the chamber. Amara stepped forward, the lantern trembling in her hand. "I've come for the final echo, to uncover the truth and break the curse." The figure tilted its head as though studying her. "The curse cannot be broken without a cost. Do you understand what you seek to uncover?" "I do," she said firmly. The figure raised a hand, and the swirling ash rose into the air, forming shapes and images. Amara saw scenes from the past, the kingdom thriving under the protection of the Starborn, the moment when the mortals turned their backs on their celestial guardians, and the Starborn's exile. But then, the images shifted. Amara saw the Queen Regent speaking in hushed tones with her advisors, their faces grim. She saw soldiers sent to hunt down the Starborn, their glowing eyes dimming as they fell to mortal weapons. And then she saw the Queen Regent herself standing before the veil, her face twisted with grief and anger. "She came here," Amara whispered. "The Queen Regent. She's the one who cursed the kingdom." "Yes," the figure said. "She sought vengeance for the Starborn's betrayal, but her grief blinded her. In her rage, she forged the curse, binding the twilight to this land and sealing the Starborn's power within the veil." Amara felt a wave of anger and sorrow wash over her. She doomed the kingdom because of her pride. "And now you stand where she once stood," the figure said, its voice heavy. "The curse can be undone, but only if you are willing to take her place." Amara's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "The veil requires a guardian," the figure explained, "one to contain the twilight and preserve the balance. If you wish to free the kingdom, you must bind yourself to this place. Your light will sustain the land, but you will never leave." Amara felt the weight of the lantern in her hand, the echoes swirling within her. The choice was clear, but it wasn't easy. Kyle stepped forward, his face pale. "You can't be serious. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Amara said quietly. Kyle shook his head. "You've done enough. You've carried this far. Why should it be you? The kingdom never deserved your sacrifice." "It's not about what they deserve," she said, meeting his gaze. "It's about what's right." Kyle clenched his fists, but he didn't argue. "For what it's worth, you're braver than anyone I've ever met." Amara gave him a faint smile, then turned to the figure. "I'm ready." The figure raised its hand, and the lantern's light flared brighter than ever before. The echoes swirled around Amara, their weight lifting as they fused with the light. The chamber filled with a blinding radiance, and Amara felt herself being pulled into the heart of the veil. As the light faded, Kyle stood alone in the chamber. The figure and the lantern were gone, and the veil's oppressive air had lifted. Outside, the twilight sky began to brighten, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the gloom. Kyle stared at the empty space where Amara had stood, his chest tight. "You really did it," he muttered, his voice breaking. "You saved them all." Amara became the guardian of the veil, her light preserving the balance and banishing the twilight from the kingdom. The people of Grey Hollow awoke to find the sun shining once more, unaware of the sacrifice that had saved them. Kyle returned to the village, carrying the memory of her choice. Though no one knew her name, he made sure her story would not be forgotten. And in the heart of the veil, Amara watched over the land, her light eternal.